Okay, folks, this is the deadline week for the Summer Shootaround bonus episode bidding. So before we get to today's episode, if you're listening to this podcast, then go to the episode description of this show, and the link will be the first thing at the very top. If you're watching this episode, you can also click below, or you see that QR code in the top right of the screen. You can bring that up on your phone, and it will take you directly to the Tiltify auction page. We've gotten a few bids. We need a lot more. I'd like to get a minimum, if we could, at least $500 in charity toward St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So the deadline to bid, rally your friends, spread the word. The deadline is this Thursday, just a couple days away, at noon Eastern on the Tiltify page. Again, Thursday at noon Eastern. The winning fan base gets an entire episode dedicated to their team. A Summer Shootaround will also, promise you, we'll toss in a few more goodies as well. This episode will run next week, the week of September 10th, day to be determined, but we're going to make it absolutely worth it for you. So continue to bid, get your bids in, and hopefully we get a healthy winning bid auction. This Thursday, noon Eastern, is the deadline. And now let's get to today's episode.
Hey there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting dodo birds. Leaky Black. Matt Norlander is here with me. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do to the like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel, please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. Today we are continuing our Summer Shootaround series that we're doing over a span of a few weeks. We've already done each team in the top 10 of the top 25 and one. And in addition to that, we're doing a few other programs that we simply think are interesting for any number of reasons. Arkansas is one of them. St. John's is another. Today, we're focusing on the University of Kentucky. The Wildcats, of course, went 23-10 last season, including 13-5 in the SEC. They lost to Texas A&M in the first game in the SEC tournament. Got a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Things were going okay. Then lost to Oakland in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Shouts to Jack Golke. As I'm sure you know, this led to John Calipari leaving Kentucky for Arkansas. And UK's new coach is Mark Pope, and he's done enough in the transfer portal to make me think he'll have an NCAA tournament team in year one at his alma mater. We'll see what Norlander thinks about that next. But first, let's get a word from our partners.
We need your sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
Okay, Norlander, Kentucky has an NCAA tournament team in year one under Mark Pope. Hell yeah or hell no?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hell yeah. But as is the case with a lot of these bonus episodes, if you will, outside the top 10, plenty of intrigue and a lot of uncertainty heading into this season due to some coaching changes. And this Kentucky roster, well, before we get to the roster, how about the fan flip that Pope managed going back to when he got the job and whatever day that wound up breaking between that and I guess 2 days later, was it, when he had the introduction at Rupp Arena, and then they harkened back to the 96 team that he was a part of, or him coming off the bus with the title trophy, and Kentucky fans going from, not everyone, but a heavy contingent having real dismay over the fact that you lost out on option 1, 2, 3, and 4 at minimum, and then you went to Mark Pope and thinking, the bloom had really fallen off the rose there, to being all in with this guy and everything that he represents, being an alum and backing him. It's been a lot of fun. It's been very interesting. In fact, we are coming off, obviously, our Candid Coaches series, which is now wrapped. And one of the questions we asked was, which coach do you think will be more successful over the next 5 years, Mark Pope or Pat Kelsey at Louisville? Louisville fans, if you want to have a Summer Shootaround episode, you're going to need to win the auction. So you've got that QR code on the screen, or you've got the link in the description of this podcast. Start raising money, because Bellarmine won this 2 years ago. So if you want your cars to be talked about for 30 plus minutes, get on it and start rallying.
We know you got that Brian Bowen money.
They got that. Well, and Louisville genuinely is believed, as another Candid Coaches question revealed, to have among the top 10 NIL situations in in all of men's college basketball. So anyway, the point is this. We put that question out there, and I thought Pope would beat Kelsey, but I thought it would be not quite 60%, but above 55% was my guess going in. He actually won 2 votes to 1. Over 100 coaches we polled, 67% picked Pope to be better over the next 5 years at Kentucky than Kelsey at Louisville. There's a number of reasons for that. GP can get into that if you want as well. But if you're a Kentucky fan listening to this podcast, that obviously should give you some additional optimism. While these coaches are no guarantee to be right, the majority that voted for Pope there within the industry because of Kentucky, its stature and everything that comes with it. In addition to Pope having a little bit of high major experience at BYU, they did have the quick transition to the Big 12 before he got this job. It's been a lively few months here. You had one of the assistants, Cody Feger, posting boom gifts before they would get commitments in the transfer portal. And this is what Kentucky needed, not to totally dip back into this conversation that we talked about plenty back in early April, but the fan base needed a reset. Calipari needed to get out of there. In an unexpected way, it wound up happening. And so here you have Kentucky and Louisville getting ready to reset their own rivalry with 2 head coaches. They hadn't made a coaching change in the same year since 1930, by the way. And so now we have a Kentucky team that's loaded up with a ton of transfers, and no one's quite sure how good this team is going to be. It could be anywhere from, in my opinion, the 15th best team in the country to the 45th. I really am not quite sure. I'm a little more optimistic on that side. I'm going to put them in my top 25. What are your thoughts, takeaways on the Kentucky experience under Pope in this offseason, GP, and set the table for listeners here as we head into November?
Well, first, I was a little surprised that Mark won that polling question as convincingly as he did over Pat. I went through a stretch where I got like 12 straight Mark Popes, and I was just a little surprised. I thought it would be closer. The explanations I got, and keep in mind, I think you do more of these verbally than I do. I do a lot of mine text messages, and so people just don't talk about it as much as they send back answers. But every once in a while, coaches will send back explanations like those, here's why I think UConn is going to make the Final Four for the 3rd straight time. And the explanation, to the extent that I got explanations, most of them were Kentucky's just set up better to win than Louisville is set up to win. Let me stop you there. I guess I won't argue, or let me stop myself there. I guess I won't argue.
You're not stopping me. Keep going.
that Kentucky is set up to win better than Louisville, because Kentucky's probably set up to win better than most. But is it really? I mean, like if you're Louisville, I understand Kenny Payne took Louisville way further down to a bad place than Cal ever took Kentucky. So, they're in theory, one guy's taking over a thing that was a little more stable. But Mark lost every player. Is that like anything it's not like Cal left anything behind.
Yeah.
And so he's really just inheriting a big brand with a great NIL situation, and Pat's just inheriting a big brand with a great NIL situation. I don't know how different the situations actually are.
They're different. Kelsey has the more gracious entry point, and I sometimes think that entry point and how you take a job under what circumstances can really work in your favor or work against you. And we may well get to a program with that exact situation here before we get out of our Summer Shootaround series this summer. Kentucky is a top 3 job in the sport. It has, in my opinion, the most relentless fan base in all of college basketball. I might even make the case, because very few ardent college football fans are on the podcast. I understand that the SEC and Alabama specifically, maybe more than any other fan base, they've got some real, and I say this loving, nut jobs that follow but Kentucky fans are on that level, if not even more so. And it's why, frankly, when you look at the context surrounding John Calipari's departure there, you just wouldn't see that happen at almost any other place in the sport. But because it's Kentucky, as one coach pointed out to me, every single competent coach over the past century that has coached at Kentucky has won a national championship when he was there. And it didn't really take that long. The coach's specific words were in the first 10 years. It's actually not even that long. If you look at Tubby Smith, Joe B. Hall, John Calipari. And so if Pope is going to be that, then the expectation will be that he wins a national championship. The league right now that he is in is tougher. than the ACC. I think that's inarguable. The SEC, and especially heading into this year, where the SEC has really looked to be especially deep there. But there are forces that can work against you with Mark Pope as well. Kelsey at least has the benefit of lowered expectations, which isn't to say that Louisville fans are going to be sitting there if he's not in the tournament by year 3 being like, all right, we'll just give it a little more time. That's not what they're there for. This is the portal era. You can flip your roster entirely, and they will hold him accountable the same way they held Kenny Payne accountable, and nobody believes that the Kelsey era will be remotely as bad as it was under Payne. Frankly, it's hard to envision how that could even be possible there. They are different jobs. I do think that Kelsey has a slightly easier pathway to being more quote-unquote successful at Louisville than Pope does at Kentucky, because eventually, and it won't take long, Kentucky fans are going to be demanding top 2, top 3 finishes in the SEC regular season standings once we get to the league tournament play. They're going to be demanding deep runs in the SEC tournament. They're going to be demanding deep runs in the NCAA tournament, and he just will not have as long of a leash as Kelsey in this regard. That said, I can't wait to watch this evolve over the next few years. And as it speaks to Kentucky specifically, I do think Pope is coming along at the right time. And Kentucky needs a coach like this coming off the Calipari. Following Calipari is not an easy ask, but it feels like Pope is in some ways the best guy to do it, even more than Scott Drew. And they struck out on Scott Drew. They didn't pursue Billy Donovan. They were turned down by Dan Hurley. But in some ways, with the way that Pope is built and the staff that he brought on, Kentucky is allowing itself, and that fan base has really embraced Pope in a way that, frankly, I just didn't see coming.
I don't know if I saw it coming. I don't know that I put that much thought into it, but it's not surprising to me that it unfolded the way it unfolded, because I watched something very similar happen the last time a school had to replace John Calipari. John takes you to incredible heights, and then it's over. Obviously, the circumstances are different leaving Memphis and leaving Kentucky. At Memphis, they were quite literally begging him to stay. And at Kentucky, they, in some cases, were begging him to leave. But then you get into a mindset as a fan of, it's like, okay, Scott Drew, Billy Donovan, Dan Hurley. Like, those are the names you're debating with your buddies. Who would you rather have, Scott Drew or Dan Hurley? Well, what about Billy Donovan? Do we know if he wants it? And these are the conversations you're having. And then, like most coaching searches, they don't land there and they land somewhere else. And the initial reaction is disappointment or frustration or confusion or something. But then you give it like 48 hours and it's just like, hey, this is our guy now. And we've got to support this guy and rally around this guy and set him up to succeed. That is what Memphis fans did with Josh Pastner, at least initially. And it is what Kentucky fans, I've watched them do with Mark Pope. Plus, he's got the personality to, and it's easy. He seems easy to like and easy to root for. And he's done enough in the transfer portal to intrigue me. I do not have Kentucky in my top 25 on one. As I went, and this happens sometimes, we talked about it before, as I start
looking at the roster and doubting yourself?
As I start really diving in, I go, I like this. I like the pieces. But it's a little bit like maybe what we said about Arkansas in a previous episode. Like, I like the roster on paper if it were a fantasy basketball team.
Yeah.
But this isn't a fantasy basketball team, and you're going to have to see how it comes together, because the truth is we don't have a long track record of people going out and adding 1 billion transfers to try to remake a roster overnight, because this kind of stuff hasn't been possible for too long. But they added, I believe, 9 transfers. And I've referenced this before. I had never bookmarked it, and so I didn't know who to credit, but I actually, in advance of this episode, went and found it. It was a tweet from College Basketball Report last season. Late in the season. It's at CBK Report. And they just tweeted college basketball teams that brought in 7+ transfers last season. Here are the teams that did that. There weren't a lot, but there were some. Okay. Arkansas, disaster. Memphis, disaster. Arizona State, didn't sniff the tournament. UCF, whatever. West Virginia, bad. Penn State, no tournament. St. John's, no tournament. NC State, was about to miss the tournament, and then that turned into a good story. But if NC State doesn't hit a buzzer beater in the ACC tournament, win the ACC tournament, literally 0 teams that brought in this many transfers in one offseason would have made the NCAA tournament. That does not look like a recipe for success. Now, I'm not being critical here, because what was Mark Pope supposed to do? Like, you got to fill up a roster and you got nobody. So this is the smartest and best way for him to remake Kentucky as quickly as possible. But this type of thing did not work last season until it popped for NC State very late. And that would be a reason to perhaps be a little skeptical that they're going to actually live up to top 25 expectations. No team did last season that was this heavily reliant on new transfers into their program. If you're curious, for whatever it's worth, Torvik does have Kentucky in the top 25 at number 23. There's actually 11 SEC teams in the top 40 at barttorvik.com. So I think there's reasons to believe. There's also reasons to be skeptical. But like, I like the players. The players, I'm intrigued by them.
We'll get to the roster in just 1 second before we get to the schedule stuff. We'll note that Mark Pope does not have an NCAA tournament win in his career. He started at Utah Valley, and he's got an interesting story in terms of how he got into coaching to begin with, but got his first head job in 2015-16 at Utah Valley, and then eventually got that going in year 3, year 4, which was enough to parlay him getting the BYU job in 2019. And all told, did a solid job at BYU, especially going from the WCC to the Big 12. 24 wins year 1, 20 year 2, 24 year 3, and then this 19 in year 4, and then this past season won 23 games. All told, 110-52 at BYU. Made the tournament twice. No postseason his first season there. So
on that, because that's the bullet point that gets bounced around a lot. He's never won an NCAA tournament game. How did Kentucky hire a guy who's never won an NCAA tournament game? Well, he's coached 9 years at Utah Valley and BYU. How many NCAA tournament games should he have won?
I'm not saying he should have won any. It's just it was, especially early in the transition, it was like, wow, Kentucky and Louisville both hired coaches without a single NCAA tournament win. And if I asked you to predict over under 0.5 career NCAA tournament wins for Kentucky and Louisville for the next coaches on March 15th or whatever, or the day we found out Calipari was leaving, everyone would have taken it over. So it's an interesting nugget more than anything else.
It's an interesting nugget. It's a factual thing. It doesn't bother me that much.
No, but I tell you what, this is exactly one of those things that if we get to year 3 and we're talking about the Kentucky Wildcats on the Summer Shootaround episode, heading into 2026, 27, and he still hasn't won a tournament game, you best believe that's going to be the number one thing associated with Mark Pope if he doesn't get that done in year 1 or year 2 at UK. So just keep it in mind. It's just a surprising thing that I think some non-UK fans listening might not be aware of. Pope did a really good job, and again, his transition in the Big 12 was good, but has not had NCAA tournament success at this point. I think the roster is set to be deep, destined to be deep. I 9 deep, I think. We'll see on the freshmen. Colin Chandler's, a top 40 level name that followed Pope to Kentucky. He would have gone to BYU. Travis Perry, a big name locally. Trent Noah as well. Noah doesn't have a ranking attached to him. Perry, though, top 80 player in his class. We'll see how much run they get, because a lot of this is going to be the transfers here. My guess at the starting 5 is Kirk Carissa, formerly of Arizona and West Virginia. Lamont Butler at San Diego State. I think he'll start. Andrew Carr is a lock to start. I think Amari Williams is highly likely to start. He actually committed, and then there was Pope actually needed to fly to Philadelphia. I don't even know. I've lost all track of how long this took. Maybe 10 days after he committed, 2 weeks after he committed, just to firm that up and not lose him, because they also got a commitment from another big, Brandon Garrison, who was at Oklahoma State. But give me Carissa, Butler, Carr, Williams, and then Jackson Robinson following Pope from BYU to Kentucky. Robinson did flirt with the NBA draft process, but did not obviously keep his name in there. There's also Kobe Brea from Dayton, who I think is going to be a tremendous 6-man. Maybe he'll wind up starting, but I think he is a really good off-the-bench shooter. He rated as the best in the sport last season. So Kentucky, there is a chance you coming up from Reed Shepherd to Brea, you might have in back-to-back years with 2 different coaches and 2 very different rosters, the most reliable 3-point threat in the sport there. They got an FDU transfer, Ainsley Almanor, who averaged 16 and change per game. We'll see where he fits in as well, and Otega Owe from Oklahoma. Like a good presence off the bench to kind of boost them there. But I would go with Creasa, Butler, Carr, Williams, Robinson as the most likely starting 5 on day one. That said, it's a deep roster, and there's definitely a chance I'm wrong on that. And you can take 2 names I had and drop them out and take 2 names off that.
I think you're probably right on 4. You might be right on all 5. I think the question mark is Kobe Brea, Lamont Butler. How do you handle that situation? But there's a scenario where, Kentucky led the country in 3-point field goal percentage last season. Turns out the team with Reed Sheppard can shoot it. Mm-hmm. Kirk Creasa shot 42.4% from 3 last season on 6.3 attempts per game. So high volume, great percentage. And then Kobe Brea, 49.8% from 3 on 6.1 attempts. You go with that backcourt. I mean, that's real. Yeah. That's real proven shooting. I mean, that might be the best shooting backcourt in the country. So, and I'm a fan of Lamont Butler from his days at San Diego State. He adds a different dynamic. This is what I mean by, and like all 5th-year players, all old guys. So, as we always say, we'll let Mark and his staff figure out the starting lineup, but they've got some really nice and interesting options there. You mentioned Jackson Robinson. He's the one who follows from BYU, averaged 14 points per game last season. So let's just say with Creasa and Brea, you got proven shooters with experience in the backcourt. Jackson Robinson just averaged 14 points for an NCAA tournament team. Andrew Carr just averaged 13 points for an NCAA tournament team. Amari Williams just averaged 12 points in the A-10. There's a lot of good pieces here. How about this? If you put them in a top 25 and one, it won't, or your top 25, even though they're not in mine, I don't think it's crazy. I like the roster breakdown. Just the thing that concerns me is that it's a lot of people who didn't know each other. 3 months ago, and at least last season, what we learned was that teams built that way tended to disappoint.
Andrew Carr, Wake Forest did not make the tournament, so just a quick correction.
Wake Forest didn't make the tournament?
No.
They should have.
I know. They were ahead in there, and they have not done it. I do think they'll do it.
Remember, they stormed the court, and they were on their way.
7-second shoot-around on the Demon Deacons. I think Steve Forbes finally ends the drought, and I think Wake Forest dances in 2020.
Well, man, I hope so.
There we go. How long it takes for them to gel, get to play together. The Pope's coaching style, which was also a reason why a lot of coaches voted for Pope over Kelsey, just because they thought
that is true.
That was just another. There were coaches that were very much like, here's why I think Kelsey will be good. And a lot of it was entry point in the ACC. But for a few coaches that voted for Pope, they're like, when you break down his tape and look what he's been doing the past few years, I actually really like how that could translate to Kentucky.
I got that a lot. I'm not speaking on Pat at all, but like coaches went out of their way to say Mark Pope's really good. We heard that from a lot of people.
Yeah. Let's do a little schedule over under regular season win total here. We've got SEC play and then some non-con games of note. I'm going to give you the over-under. I'm going to set it at 20.5. I'm intrigued to see what GP does on this because he does not have – this is the first team GP doesn't have ranked in our Summer Shootaround series so far this season. So the non-con games of note. November 12th, Champions Classic versus Duke. It's going to be awesome. Kentucky going up against Duke and Cooper Flag that early in the season. That's going to be really, really cool. December 3rd, they're at Clemson. December 7th, they play Gonzaga in Seattle. December 14th is the home game against Louisville. By the way, Kentucky is 13-3 in its last 16 games against the Cardinals. And then December 21st, they are against Ohio State in the Garden for the CBS Sports Classic. So they've got 5 non-con games of note. Duke on a neutral, at Clemson, Gonzaga on a semi-neutral, not really, home to Louisville, and then Ohio State on a neutral. Everything else is a bye game at home. Kentucky's non-conference home scheduling basically has to lock that program in. I think they are like practically the hand is forced here, and if 6, if not 7 home games that are bye games there. So nevertheless, they got it done there. In SEC play, they have 2 plays against Tennessee and Bama, home and road there. Only hosting Arkansas. We talked about that on the Hogs Summer Shootaround situation there, and then it's a sprinkle throughout the rest of the league schedule. So I'm going to go over under 20.5 wins, and I'll go first on this one. Mm-hmm. I will say 21-10, the first tour here from Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats heading into the SEC tournament. I think they get it. I think they get it narrowly. The non-conference should be mostly manageable with those bye games. They get Western Kentucky, which is, by the way, an awesome thing that they're going to be willing to host Western Kentucky, which hasn't been a common thing, obviously, with an in-state rival like that, or
non-rival, if you will. But yeah, give me 21 and 11. Do your backward math, GP. What do you got?
I got to go backwards math here. Start at 31. I'm going to give them 3 non-league losses.
Let's have a little fun. Let's just pick the 3. So
okay.
Champions Duke, at Clemson, Gonzaga and Seattle, home to Louisville, Ohio State on a neutral in the Garden. Who are the 3 losses?
Champions Classic to Duke.
Yep.
In Seattle.
To Gonzaga. Okay.
And inside the Garden against Ohio State.
Okay. By the way, since we've done our Gonzaga episode, Steel Venter suffered.
Yeah, done for the year.
He's done for the year. That is absolutely atrocious after he missed all of last season with an ACL prior to that. But that news came out earlier this week. We obviously did our Gonzaga episode a couple weeks ago. Okay, so you got 3 non-con losses.
And I just think the league is going to be really tough. Like, I think they can be good and still take a lot of losses.
Yeah.
So let's go
20-game schedule.
20-game schedule.
Right? Am I right on that?
I don't know. I think last time
it's 18. Hold on. It's 18.
I think it's 18. I assumed it should be 20 because they got 50,000 teams.
It's 18. Yes. They should. You're right about that. I actually prefer fewer league games because it opens the door for more quality non-con games. So I appreciate the SEC still holding out on this. But yeah, 18-game league schedule.
Okay. Something like 10-8 in the league.
Ooh.
But I still think that's NCAA tournament good.
All right, so I got him at 21.
So 11, so 31 minus 11. I got him at 20 wins heading into the
I
SEC
think that's exactly what we had on the Hogs. I think I had Arkansas 21-10, and you had them 20-11, and I've got Kentucky 21-10, and you've got them 20-11. SEC vibes across the board. I think obviously it's hard to project out those specific scenario heading into the SEC, but if that's what they are, if Kentucky can win 20 games in the regular season going into the SEC tournament, you figure it'll be projected to make the field heading in and just might need to dodge whatever first opponent they have there.
Oakland, got to dodge Oakland.
Well, they fortunately don't have to play Oakland. They are not scheduled to play or match up against Oakland this year.
Thank God.
The committee makes a point to not have repeat first-round matchups between high and mid-majors, if at all possible. So they should dodge the Grizz and turn a new chapter. Look forward to what's going to be a pretty exciting year. It's kind of as speaking as a media member, GP. Calipari seems always interesting, always worth talking about. It's fun to be able to talk about Calipari now at a different school and talk about Kentucky with a different coach. It's just I like the change of pace. We're going to be looking at and examining Kentucky under a new regime, and I think that's refreshing.
I think that's an episode.
And I think that's a show.
Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Terry Teagle, legend. Huck Larnell. Sorry, I got distracted. I told you before the show, and it just came up on Twitter. There's bomb threats at the school right by my wife's store. Like my wife could be blowing up right now.
No, she's not.
I hope not.
Yeah, I really hope not as well.
I hope not. Huck, Larnell, I hope they're okay as well.
No shouts to bomb threats, just so we're clear. That's a podcast official stance. We're not shouting to bomb threats.
Oh, no. We're against bomb threats.
Very, very against it, yes.
We're against bombs. Are you willing to take a stance against bombs?
Yes, unless we're talking about an Outkast tune. Otherwise, yeah.
yes. Yeah. Unless it's on an Outkast album.
There we go.
We're against bombs. I mean, listen, let the world know. Eye on College Basketball Podcast, we're against bombs.
That's right. Yeah.
If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, including Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That should be reflected in the comments. So do that. We'll talk to you again real soon. Till then, take care.